Welcome to the FML podcast, the podcast on a mission to uncover actionable insights, explore the latest trends, and to catalyze your fintech's growth. Join Growth Gorilla's founder and managing director, Shamir Sajdev, and some of fintech's hardest-hitting marketers and leaders.
Welcome everyone to today's episode of the FML podcast. Today I'm joined by Marc Winitz, CMO at Rapyd. Marc, thank you very, very much for jumping on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks, Shamir. Thanks for having me.
Before we kind of jump into the nitty gritty, would you mind just sort of introducing yourself and telling us a little bit more about your journey so far?
Rapyd is a global fintech as a service platform, and we essentially help companies literally around the world embed financial services capabilities into any of their applications. So I've been with Rapyd for 4 years. I actually was the first marketing hire at Rapyd. I always like to tell people the startup was not really like 3 guys and a dog, more like 30 guys and a dog kind of startup. But first marketing hire, company really was not on the map. And in the last 4 years, we've gone from a team of 30 or 40 as a company to close to 1,000 people from a workforce perspective, got about 35 people in marketing. So big growth. We work in the fintech space. I spent the previous 10 years to that also working in fintech as a CMO or a head of marketing. And then on a personal level, I'm kind of a citizen of the world. I love travel, very well traveled by American standards. So I've been in about 40 different countries at least, many times to the UK.
Oh, wow.
Just got back from New Zealand, actually. Love different cultures. I also am a serial food and wine drinker, kind of if you know the term foodie. So it's actually a correlation to the work. I love working in global business, and it's always so fascinating and interesting to me to learn about different cultures and the way different cultures and people act and interact. And you kind of see a lot of that through things like food and wine, actually. So those things kind of come together. But just the fact that we live on one big planet, but there's a lot of differences in some ways, and there's some sameness too. So kind of a little bit about me.
Let's talk a bit about Rapyd. And I want to kick off with the rebrand, really. But before we kind of jump into that, do you want to just tell us a little bit about sort of what Rapyd does, who it serves?
At its highest level, we're really looking to make the economic pie bigger for business. And so we like to look at this idea of helping businesses liberate global commerce. And what that really means is that we are providing very easy to use tools and capabilities that help businesses create different kinds of payment and payout experiences and do that anywhere across the globe. So we have created, essentially we're an API company from a B2B perspective, and we've come up with a way to allow developers to implement payment methodologies based on local payment needs. And it's a very complex process to do that, because as you look across different global markets at a local level, payment systems are very fractured. They're very unique to the local ways of payments and payouts that businesses and consumers do. So it's not just necessarily like, let's say, paying with a credit card in a specific market. That might be the case for where you're sitting in the UK or where I'm sitting in the US. But across countries, across regions, people pay and want to be paid in different ways, right? There are some markets that are cash heavy, some leverage bank transfers, some utilize e-wallets. You might be familiar with like Apple Pay, but it turns out in markets like Indonesia, they may have 40 or 50 e-wallets on a consumer device to manage their financial activities. So very difficult thing for businesses to gather all that together and make it work with inside their own business processes and workflows and applications. And Rapyd kind of provides an easy button to make that happen.
Let's start talking about your rebrand. So first and foremost, I think, anyone who's listening, take a split second, put us on pause for a split second and jump onto the Rapyd website. I think it's, the branding that you've done is, really out there, but it's really exciting as well. Could you kind of take us through the process and that journey for that rebrand, what you were trying to achieve and how you think it speaks to your target customer?
Let me just sort of take a step back and just talk about what is the purpose of a brand, especially in a B2B setting and really in kind of the software infrastructure world that I come from. Brands are all about trust for sure. I think most people would get that. But the real role of a brand, especially for a company like what Rapyd is to really to get a potential buyer to want to take a look and to learn more about what you do. Oftentimes we think of brands as, the logo, it's very common to kind of start there. And that's certainly an important part of a brand, but it's really not what a brand is. You really need something much bigger that represents what the company is and what is the promise you're making to consumers and what represents how you deliver that promise. And that's embodied in something called a brand idea. When I originally came into Rapyd 4 years ago, like most early stage startups, we were sort of looking for how do we talk about ourselves? What are we trying to say? And it was very straightforward. It talked about what the business did. And you certainly need to do that. But it really didn't capture kind of what was at the core essence of what was driving the customers we're trying to go after, to support their businesses. And so we realized we didn't have a good brand story. We worked with an outside brand agency to help us sort of figure that out, an agency called Known based in New York. And we came up with this idea of building bold. And what it really represents is just the concept of our customers are looking to do very, very big things. And big doesn't necessarily have to mean the same thing to all customers. Big can be for a smaller business, I'm just trying to move into another market, but that's a big deal for me. For other types of customers that might be multinational or global in scale, they may be trying to work in multiple markets and doing many, many different types of activities with lots of different use cases and customers and segments behind all of that, right? So this idea of taking bold steps, no matter who you are, and being able to build whatever you want, kind of really formulated this concept of a brand idea. So that was sort of the first thing is coming up with the idea that represented how to think about the brand. And then from there, what we realized in the market, and I have seen just in the space for over a decade, is a lot of companies, especially in the payments world, but you see this in other industries too, they kind of say the same thing, right? They're all sort of talking about and saying the same types of things. We do X, we do Y. And you certainly need to articulate very well what you do, but you need to essentially set yourself apart. What we looked to do was create a visual identity, a visual language, let's say, and a tone of voice that was very, very unique and really didn't look like a B2B payments infrastructure brand. We really tried to make ourselves almost look like a consumer brand, very kind of in your face, very much, language that was almost sort of jarring for something as buttoned up as financial services, right? So we started to build the brand concept around sort of these ideas, but then brought it back to very real things. And those real things were kind of the core values, which were really, for us, 3 values, I would say, Shamir. So the first is, what is it that makes Rapyd unique, and why would a company want to work with us versus somebody else? And that's because we felt that we were fearless in our approach, meaning we think we can do anything as Rapyd, so we do it. And we're also smart about how we do it. So we'll take on the impossible ideas, impossible, objectives when others won't. And, it turns out that our customers, in a way, they do the same thing. Like, they are not necessarily trying to save the world or necessarily build the next Apple, but for whatever it is that they're trying to do, they need to be fearless to go do that. So sort of this concept of being fearless and being smart was pretty key. I think the second thing was we knew at the outset that ultimately, we're in a people business. Even though we're moving money, it still is affecting people, whether you're a consumer or a business. So that was sort of one element that was key. A second element was the workforce, right? So Rapyd is a global company, and we have employees literally around the world that understand the local markets that we work in, which is really critical in a business like Rapyd's, where you're working with these different types of local payment methods and regulations. So the second thing was sort of put people first, right? So this was sort of a second, let's call it a core value of the brand. And then the last thing, which really embodied the company, and I think you could sort of look at Rapyd in a way a little bit like kind of a differentiated player that sort of thinks outside the box. We're very direct. So we tell things like it is, and we actually, you can kind of see it on my hat here. It says, cut the BS. We also like to say, skip the BS. We tell it like it is. And I think it's really, really important because, you've got to be able to lever off of who are you and are you going to deliver, when the chips are down. So kind of collectively, all these things together, and I know this is a bit of a long-winded answer, but it's how do you move beyond we're in payments and we're trying to, help other businesses connect around the world and accept different kinds of local payment methods. Yeah, it's what we do, but it really isn't who we are. And I think that's sort of what drove the rebrand was, could we encapsulate that in a way that spoke to people looking for different solutions, trying to think about solving big problems, big to them, and do it in a way that made them want to take a hard look at Rapyd. So that was really what was behind the brand, was sort of market differentiation, but in a really unique way.
It's really, really interesting. I think you're to the point, you do look and feel a lot more like a consumer brand. One of the things that you kind of mentioned before, I think we hit the record button, was when we were kind of talking about, what we're going to go through on today's podcast, was around demand generation. Your views and opinions around how important a brand piece is for an effective demand generation strategy. And, I'd love for you to kind of like take me through that, take our listeners through that, and talk us through your approach.
Demand generation is a very complicated activity, right? And there's a lot of elements that go into it. So before you kind of get into, we want to create demand, which usually in the B2B context means like you want leads. It's kind of what it means. But it's more than that. It's actually, can you identify a set of customers you want to go after and target markets that fit, whatever is what you would call your ideal customer profile. You have to kind of know who it is you're going after. Sometimes this concept of an ICP used commonly in B2B, to some degree, I would say in B2C marketing, really understanding that, right? So who is it that I'm really trying to get to? And like when you break it down, it's like it's not good enough to say something like, I want to go after financial services. I want to go after, like online trading or logistics or whatever. And then even there's a double click on top of that. So you have to understand that. And then there's the whole element of persona-based marketing, right? Which is, who are the people involved in the decision-making process along that journey? People like to use that term, which is sort of, I know I want to do something as a buyer of some type of solution, whether that's technology or other. And what do I want to figure out as the buyer along the way to get to an endpoint and make a decision about some type of vendor and then, contract with them and use them, right? So you have to really understand those two things really, really well. The role of the brand is essentially how do you insert yourself early enough into the process that that buyer will understand that you are somebody that they kind of want to look at. And there's a lot of ways to do that. In our case, what we like to do is, one, I've already talked a little bit about how we've manifested our brand identity with the rebrand, right? So this whole concept of liberating global commerce, which is sort of a tagline for the company. It's about making the economic pie bigger. So that kind of gets someone's attention about, okay, yeah, that's this concept of liberation. That's unique. That's interesting. This concept of build bold, which is really more the brand idea, but it's again, this idea that I'm trying to build something, whatever build means to me, right? It could actually mean like building capabilities. It could be building my business into a new market, what have you. And then it's how do you back all of that up with information and engagement methodologies that get different personas engaged with you and interested in you to learn more, right? So one way Rapyd does that is we actually are one of the most prolific public relations houses from a fintech startup perspective in the world, right? We're extremely active from a PR perspective globally. I personally built, along with our CEO, Marc Winitz, really the whole idea of what Rapyd is, which goes beyond the things I've already said when it gets more into the weeds around this idea of embedding financial services into applications. Rapyd was really the first company to go do that. And the way that we did that was by essentially launching a variety of thought leadership initiatives that show that we're experts in the topic. So one way to do that, one thing that we do is we actually do a lot of our own primary research, right? We actually go out and we survey different markets around the world. What is it that businesses are doing, or what is it that consumers are doing from a payments perspective? And we actually develop really unique and strong viewpoints around that type of activity. And we can tie that then into kind of the brand concept, but we're actually putting out into the world things like, this is a trend in terms of where the market is going. And we're the ones that are actually doing the work to identify those patterns. And then we're using the public relations machine that we've built to go get that out across both anything from trade publications to tier one media to even, to podcasts like this is a great example. We actually, in our early days, before we were a $15 billion valuation company, we were way less than that. Didn't have big budgets, didn't have big teams. We had to go find different places where we could kind of go get our story out. So, a big part of the demand generation element at a macro level is how do you kind of create awareness through your brand? And the way to do that is to correlate it to something that has meaningful value. So in this case, information we've developed through research, which we then distribute through public relations. So that's sort of kind of one step. So I say more tactically speaking, once you start that, that's really kind of very top of funnel what I'm talking about. Then the next step is, what are the actual programs and processes you put in place to go target different customer segments, right? So I'm not going to say anything shocking or earth-shattering here, and something I'm sure you're very familiar with, Shamir, and I'm sure the audience probably is too to some degree. But segmentation matters. We sort of took an all things to all people approach initially when we launched Rapyd, but that was just to get our name on the map. From how do you then go try to build a pipeline of business? You have to get into that segmentation, and you have to start to build programs that speak to those different personas. So we spend a lot of time on the product marketing element of what it is that we do. So when I actually got hired, I told our CEO, when he was literally my first conversation with him, I still remember this. I said, look, you're trying to paint this big vision of what you're going to go do. You're going to go build this company that's going to go harmonize all the world's local payment networks together, and then you're going to make it easy for people to put it into their applications and start transacting. Like, I'm going to guess most people on this podcast won't understand how complicated that is. That is wildly complicated, that vision. It's bold, it's crazy, it's sort of nuts. And I said, you needed to really do two things. First thing is to build a brand. We've already talked about that. Then the second thing is you've got to have really, really strong product marketing, right? So when you have a very technical product like Rapyd, it's very important that you can articulate what is the sets of capabilities that your product provides, but then trace it back to what are all these different needs that the different personas in that buying journey have. And when you look at what a company like Rapyd does, where we are collecting different kinds of payments. So collecting is things like, I want to take a credit card payment. I want to pay for something with a bank transfer. That's collecting. Then there's dispersing. I want to send money to somebody, right? Then there's, a wallet capability. I want to actually hold money somewhere so I can move it around the world and do things with it. And then I want to be able to issue cards, think of credit cards, debit cards, prepaid cards, whatever, so that I can actually, support different kinds of transaction flows, right? So those are sort of the four core things that Rapyd does. There's a lot that goes behind all of that, but the net of it is you've got to be able to now tie together what is the product capabilities that work kind of in an integrated fashion. So there's a lot of, interplay between how we talk about the brand, how we leverage product marketing to tell these sort of user stories that help, our customers and our clients figure out what it is they're trying to solve. Then you get into a whole nother part, which is a separate discussion we can get into if you want to, which is how do you actually operationalize that? Like, what are the things you go do to go do that? But that's sort of how I kind of think about that demand generation at a high level is, what is the target market? What is the person I'm going after? What is the right target customer I'm going after? How do I create a brand story? Then bring it down to what is the story that I want to tell the persona? And then what is it that I'm trying to tell them, from a product capability perspective, kind of all wrapped up inside of kind of a larger brand story. So
I would love to drill down further into the operations and that element. I think that'd be incredibly useful. So I kind of like hand over back to you and let you talk us through that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can do that, right? So I've talked about the PR element, and the PR element is good for the big brand story. But the other reason we really do it is because we do a lot of stuff with organic search. Oftentimes when we get quoted in the media, people are linking back to Rapyd. So that only helps to our website. So that only helps us from a organic search traffic perspective, to build authority into kind of our website, right? So when you're a company like Rapyd, which is global, you're trying to get as many points back to your website as you can, even if some of that traffic is unqualified or irrelevant. It's okay as long as you've got the right processes in place to weed out the stuff that doesn't matter. You start to collect information about a potential prospect. So a lot of work from the PR perspective isn't just for the brand, it's actually to drive traffic into a funnel, right, from a conversion perspective. Now, you and I spoke a little bit before, and you said something interesting to me before we actually started the recording about B2B customers you've talked to that want to use paid media. We actually do a fair amount of paid media, and there's a lot that can go into utilizing paid media from a B2B perspective, because what it ends up doing is, yes, you can certainly do a lot of testing, which I think is of real value for paid, is sort of putting out a different, series of campaigns and concepts and ideas, seeing what potential user, likes, and then, optimizing your acquisition process based on that. So there's a value in paid for that. The other thing is, as you do more paid, there actually is, and we've seen it in the data. This is kind of a dirty little secret, I would say, but your organic search traffic does much better. Shocker, right? That Google would all of a sudden tweak their algorithms to reward those that are doing more with paid search. But guess what they do? Well, we'll see what happens with the advent of generative AI and what that all means. But that's a longer term thing. But the bottom line is there is an impact there. So those things work well together. I think another thing is it really depends on when you're working on demand generation strategy. You also need to look at not just like what your product does, but what is the market that you're going after, and essentially tune your marketing activities at a B2B level, like as a Rapyd would be, to speak to specific industry pain points, right? So we don't just talk about the fact that we solve payments problems and we provide payments infrastructure and we do card issuing and we do, different kinds of, payment and payout capabilities. We do all that and we do talk about it. But we also talk about how does that impact different markets, right? So as you and I were talking about on our website, you can go on there and you'll see different kinds of verticals. So we're talking to the different types of verticals about what their actual problems are, right? So for example, we do a lot of work in the logistics space. Very unsexy business, very, very manual type of business as it relates to payments. So we've actually done a lot of work on that product marketing side to talk directly to the pain points that type of business has. That would be different than if you were to go talk to, let's say, an online trading platform, as an example. So a lot of work there. And then what that gets into is you can certainly do paid and organic types of marketing to try to build a funnel. That's sort of one way. But another way is to actually go after what's called account-based marketing, where you're actually targeting very specific companies that really go back to that ICP. It's better to actually try to find a small number of very targeted customers that are a perfect fit for you and try and put your marketing focus there than trying to kind of be all things to all people when you can do that. Now, in Rapyd's case, we have to do both just because of the scale of our business. We're literally operating in dozens of countries around the world. Even, for us, it's too complicated to try to do that all over the place, but we do apply select things like account-based marketing, which is highly targeted in very specific markets or in specific countries. And then we look for a broader overlay of things like paid media and social activity, to get kind of a broader kind of focus on the funnel. That's really kind of what you would call like the top of funnel, right? Then the next thing that we're looking at is really the life cycle process. So we do spend a lot of time once we've engaged with a customer trying to get them to continue to want to look at Rapyd and engage with us. Now, without getting too deep in the weeds on this, if someone may raise their hand right away and say, hey, Rapyd, we want to talk to you. Great. We give that to sales and sales takes that over and they start their process of engagement and understanding what a customer need is and taking it through a buying cycle. By the way, marketing is still working in tandem with sales to help move that customer through the journey. And that goes back to that idea of things like thought leadership and publishing research and putting out information or creating events that are interesting to the customer because you want them to see what it is that you offer and how you solve a problem. I think another thing that's really critical, whether it's that type of marketing situation or more that account-based marketing idea I mentioned before, is customer stories still completely matter. At the end of the day, no matter what kind of a splash I can make as a marketer with a brand or what kind of experience I can provide, when you're working with someone's business, they've got to be able to trust you. And the easiest way to do that is to get a referral or to look at what else another customer said. So we actually spend a lot of time, and you can see this on Rapyd's website at rapyd.net. If you just go to the resources section, we have lots of case studies that show how we, kind of work with customers to do that. There's all kinds of other types of things too. So there's a whole other area that we work on from a demand gen perspective is field marketing, right? Oftentimes people think of field marketing as things like events, and they are that, right? This is things like, trade shows. It could be things like conferences. It could be, industry, kinds of confabs, what have you. There's yet a whole nother set of things that we do with the brand and with that whole concept of life cycle marketing and actually paid media around event marketing and field marketing. Those things are highly correlated. So there's a lot of kind of tools in the toolbox, you can say, The number one thing, though, is really understand who it is you're going after. What is it that constructs your buying journey? And then what are the types of programs and activities you put in place to try to move somebody, through that funnel once you can kind of identify them and get them to kind of start interacting with you.
That's absolutely fantastic, and an amazing overview. The few things that kind of come to my mind, and we'll kind of work through them in terms of questions. One is, we look at activities such as, for example, like PR, in publications, tier one, producing research, appearing on podcasts, things like that. A lot of that stuff is not measurable. So how do you, as CMO, justify almost your spend around that to the rest of the C-suite? And what advice would you give to any sort of other marketing leads in B2B organizations that want to move away from the more traditional lead gen into the demand generation to try and help them?
It's a really tough nut to crack. The last decade has been focused on this whole concept of growth marketing, which is really around, I'm going to put in X dollars, I'm going to get Y out of it. And that does work for some kinds of market, right? Like in, business to consumer advertising in some ways, like direct marketing as an example, you can do that. If you have the right kind of, marketing infrastructure set up, there's attribution capabilities where you can kind of see I've done something, and as long as I can measure it, I can start to show that ROI. But, as we've seen with things like Apple's iOS update and what that's done to being able to track or not track things, that's getting harder, right? Third-party data is continuing to, sort of suffer from, not being, something that you can kind of count on for attribution in all cases. And so, honestly, a lot of the conversation I'm having with the C-suite is, I'm looking more at like, what is the velocity of the pipeline that is being built between marketing and sales as my guidepost for, is it working or isn't it working? And this is definitely more art than science. We're certainly looking at data. We're looking at, analytics that come in. We're trying to track things that we can, like you can obviously do it for something like paid media, right? But how do you track the ROI of something organic, right? How do you track the ROI of something, from a PR perspective? That's a much harder proposition to go after. And so you have to kind of, get the C-suite to understand that it's not a like for like thing. It's not always, I'm going to invest X in something and get Y out of it. That just isn't the state of how marketing honestly really works. It's also not the state of how, you can kind of really calculate ROI. And that becomes a whole nother kind of discussion, which is, what are the inputs that support those calculations of ROI, right? Is it all of marketing? Is it just the programs that you run? There's different kinds of decisions you have to make there to, kind of build ROI models. So what we try to do is, I'd say maybe two or three big things. First thing is, as I said before, we have budgeted out activities we know that are important for us to go build the brand. And I think we've lost this in this era of growth marketing. And I think it's to the detriment of companies where they're not factoring in the necessity of building brand, which has a very powerful impact on the demand gen. There isn't an easy way to calculate that. You just almost have to accept it. Like, if you're familiar with the term technical debt, which is sort of the idea that, like, for a company like Rapyd, where you have software developers and engineers and R&D, and they're developing the technology, there's a cost to that just to have something that you can go sell. It's kind of like that. That's sort of the same thing. The important thing out of that technical debt concept is that there's an investment in brand that just needs to exist to support the attributable things that you're then going to go do, right? What are the attributable things? So things like paid media would certainly be one that would be obvious, right? A secondary one would be things like using this concept that we talked about earlier of account-based marketing, where we actually look at marketing attribution in the customer journey or the customer buying cycle. So where can marketing play a role once a lead has surfaced itself in our funnel? And where do we sort of touch that lead from a marketing perspective in a major way that's meaningful? And then the key is meaningful. And the other key to meaningful is, what's the agreement between sales and marketing, and what is the meaningful thing that marketing is doing? So we look at things like the first touch in that process of a buying cycle, which could be anything like, they've downloaded, a key piece of content that is important and useful. It could be attending a briefing with us, either, something that's, at an event in the field, or it's, like a specialized briefing that we do from a virtual perspective. There's different kinds of things that we agree that are meaningful full touches. And so you sort of have to blend, the things that you can attribute from a data perspective that you can see with the investment that you have to make, that isn't quite as attributable, let's say. I think that one of the most important things is just, do you have the right MarTech infrastructure stack in place, right? So, you need to be able to be looking at, what are the factors that are showing us, that people are engaging with the content that we're putting out. We're looking at anything from site traffic to specific pages, to traffic to specific, types of thought leadership that we might publish, et cetera, that tells us, based on sort of those more opaque, brand building activities, that there's something there. And so you can kind of trace a line between, some of the things that show us that there's activity there, to then kind of getting into a buying cycle. So that tells us something. I think the biggest thing, though, is actually just what is the velocity, meaning what is coming through the sales and marketing pipeline, and what is the rate of that. And that will tell you whether or not the brand investment is working. But again, it's not a like for like thing. It's if you try to go and make some correlation between, I'm going to put whatever, $5,000 a month, $10,000 a month, or pounds or euros or whatever into PR, am I going to get something out of it? It's got to be looked at in a larger sort of holistic way than just get a lead from it, right? There's more, sort of to it. So as long as you have a strategy in place that allows you to look at each of those different components that I just said, you can sort of piece that together. I mean, ultimately, you've got to justify the spend from a marketing perspective, but if you're doing your job holistically, it should be showing itself in the pipeline, overall what that looks like. One other thing I should also say, if you want to dig into this in this conversation, is, and one of the other key channels for us is social media. So we do a ton with social media, and a lot of that's organically driven, but all of the things that Rapyd does, some of those are the activities that I've already spoken about. Others are just different types of things we do from like a thought leadership perspective. And that could just be things like, we happen to have a very large preponderance of women that work in R&D at Rapyd, both from an engineering and a product perspective, extremely high for a tech company. So when, we just came across and just had International Women's Day, that's kind of like every day at Rapyd, actually. So we talk about that quite a bit in the marketing that we do. And I'm saying this is that there's a lot of things you can go do that don't necessarily have a cost to them, but they can be monetizable from a marketing investment perspective that you can then kind of leverage. We put a lot of content out from a social media perspective that comes off of, different types of things that we do that are not necessarily air quotes campaign related, like paid media related. That helps us, drive a funnel and engage with potential prospects and keeps us top of mind. So, I think it's another area to kind of, click into. But I guess the point of it is really that, that channel is as important as ever. And we see that, and a lot of the investment goes into content creation, and that there's not always a correlation between what's the ROI of that, right?
And just talking about organic social media, I think that's massively undervalued by, so many B2B organizations. Speaking from experience, and all credit to my marketing manager here for this, one of the best things that we ever did was sort of, it was kind of like a cross between sort of ABM and organic social stuff. We had a whole bunch of football shirts designed up with Growth Gorilla football shirts, but with logos, sponsorship logos from basically our target customers. And we plonked that onto LinkedIn, and it, we got the timing right, because it was around about the time where Coinbase done that ad on the Super Bowl, and then we dropped it the next day. That was a bit of, that was serendipitous, but it ended up going viral, and we ended up getting, I don't know, dozens of leads. We signed dozens of clients on the back of that. We even got an offer for some to buy the agency. But, we've forever been trying to recreate that. But I think, if you can kind of get it right and be slightly, think out of the box, you can kind of make those things happen kind of organically. But I think the other part of it as well is having like your team, your company bought into that as well, and understanding the power of social media. So getting behind the brand, and then getting behind, spokespeople or ambassadors for the brand as well. So yeah, that's a huge, especially with LinkedIn, because let's be honest, the quality is not amazing. There's an opportunity still to stand out from the crowd there.
There is, yeah. I think like on the social side, especially on a network like LinkedIn, I think if you can, and this took us a while to figure this out. So like I've said, at the beginning of the podcast, I've been here in just over 4 years. So when I got to Rapyd, there were like 800 followers. We just passed 80,000 like 2 weeks ago or something. So we've really had the growth over, 4 years on stuff like that. And so much of that growth is attributable to just a wide and diverse range of things that Rapyd does that we then post about, right? So it's everything from social initiatives that we back to employee-related initiatives to product things to thought leadership to events that we're speaking at. We do things also, not so much as much right now, but previously the last couple of years, like we actually produced, believe it or not, our own EDM shows in Europe. It was a whole other brand building thing, which started out really as an employee recruiting thing. But then that grew into something much bigger to the fact that we have a very diverse workforce, which is really a huge strength for Rapyd. And I don't say that as an altruistic thing. It was one of the reasons that attracted me to the company. But more importantly, because we're working in so many markets, we have a company that represents the world, right? So you have a lot of people that, yes, they have similar views, kind of, country to country in terms of like what we're doing, but the cultures that they come from are different, right? So they're posting on their own LinkedIn, but in a sense, on behalf of Rapyd, about like what's a payment challenge that their customers are seeing, or what's a local kind of thing that they're doing that's important. So there's a lot you can do with social media, to engage an audience and start to build. But I think the key is don't just post about yourself, right? And that's a pretty common piece of advice. And really kind of mix it up, right? Really kind of try to make it unique and interesting, preferably things that are shareable and unique. And I'd say the last thing is, you said a really key word, it's ambassador. So find some key ambassadors. In my case, I'm very fortunate that I have a CEO who is very good at understanding the power of social media, and he posts very, very smart things in LinkedIn. But we also have lots of other people that are ambassadors across the company in different markets that are talking about anything from HR issues in Dubai to payment trend issues in Singapore, different types of things. We also have not shied away from ambassadors from a public relations perspective. So in most companies, you might have one or two people that speak on behalf of the company. For size of Rapyd, we probably have like 15 people that speak on behalf of the company. Really unusual. And we do it all over the world. So we actually get ourselves very close to local media markets, and we talk about what it is that we're doing in different markets around the world. But the only way we can do that is to have this bench of ambassadors that understand the local and regional market nuances that can then kind of go talk to them. And it kind of correlates to social media in a way of what I just said. So I think there's a lot of ways to kind of skin that cat in terms of how you think about social strategy.
Mark, I think, being honest, I think I could talk to you all day about marketing strategy and pick your brains. There's an absolute wealth of information that you kind of provided us with today. But we've only got limited time, unfortunately. Yeah. Before we kind of jump into our quick fire round, if I just ask, what does the future hold for Rapyd? What's next on the list?
This day and age, we are really, really focused on making the most of a kind of an unsettled business environment. I think we can fairly say right now, right? So, we're really unique in the sense that we're one of the few true global fintechs in the world. We want to keep that mantle and continue to build out in the markets that are critical to us. So we're continuing to work in, multiple key markets around the world, and we will do that hopefully over the next 24 to 36 months. We've been vocal about potentially moving to some kind of liquidity event in the future, but that all sort of depends on how everyone executes. So we're going to continue to focus on what I've talked about in this conversation in terms of execution, and bring this ability to help businesses anywhere in the world, make the economic pie bigger. The other thing that we're really doing is we're continuing to not just grow organically, but we also acquire companies. It's a real uniqueness to Rapyd. And Given the unsettled economic environment, we think that there's tremendous opportunities to go find undervalued companies and the businesses that they're serving onto the Rapyd platform. So, a lot of continued growth ahead of us, but certainly we've got to, like everybody else, navigate it's kind of some uncertain times to kind of get to the other side of this.
That was fantastic. Before I let you go, let's quickly jump into our quick fire round. What podcast are you listening to at the moment?
Yeah, there's actually two I really love, right? So there's one called All In, and it's for very sophisticated Silicon Valley investors. So David Sachs, who is part of the PayPal Mafia, Chamath Palihapitiya, who was the first VP of marketing, I believe, at Facebook, and now he runs Social Capital. He used to own the Golden State Warriors, so shout out to my local San Francisco Bay Area folks. And a couple of other key guys. Anyways, it's a US-based podcast, but these guys are very sophisticated tech investors, and they have a really interesting global viewpoint around how business, government, technology, and policy all kind of work together. So really worthwhile listening to. And then another really fun one is called Smart Lists, which is a couple of, or a few, I should say, Hollywood, I think you could call them A-listers, Will Arnett, Justin Bateman from Arrested Development, and Sean Hayes, and they're just hilarious. They interview like the top celebrities in the world, the top TV directors and film producers, top singers. Bono was just on, and it's funny but very insightful because they make it very real. So those are two of my favorites.
What's your favorite fintech app?
Beyond Rapyd, I can't say I have a favorite app actually. I think there's a lot of good ones, that are out there that are B2C. There's sort of folks that play in the B2B space that are interesting, but I can't really say that I have any specific favorite one.
Well, what are you currently reading at the moment, or what would you recommend to our listeners?
I'm actually not a huge reader of books. I do read a lot of, business and technical publications. So that's everything from TechCrunch to The Verge to The Economist to Bloomberg and so forth. But I really love podcasts. So listen to a lot of those. So Pivot is another one where I kind of find information that I think is really, really good. That's Kara Swisher from Silicon Valley days, Scott Galloway, Professor G. I think we're really kind of seeing a migration kind of away from traditional media to sort of this podcasting world. And that's really where I get a lot of information. I'd also say, not that I'm not a big book reader, but I also just enjoy entertainment in general. So, I'm a huge Star Wars and Mandalorian fan and a huge Voice fan, if you're familiar with that show in the US. So I find a lot of inspiration. I say this, I find a lot of inspiration from those types of media. And so I spend time with that.
Like there's been like a run of like sports documentaries recently. And I quite like those, like The Last Dance with like Michael Jordan. That's really good. Like, there was another one on Netflix where they've like done interviews of like sports coaches and how they prep their team for like the game ahead and to get ready. And I think that's really interesting for like, I think people management. So they're very cool. And I suppose last question, what's one thing that I haven't asked you that I perhaps should have?
I think I have mentioned my trip to New Zealand. I just got back from a 2-week, which by American standards is like an eternity for a vacation. I know for the rest of the world, it's nothing. Certainly in Europe, it's not. But I just did 2 weeks in New Zealand.
That's like a long lunch.
So 2 weeks and a disconnected 2 weeks, I would say. I really didn't do too much work, which was amazing. Like literally like an hour's worth, I think, in 2 weeks. Don't tell my boss. But no, I it had been a bucket list thing for me. I had wanted to go there for a long time. Finally got down there and spent 2 weeks, and it was awesome. I mean, people were really, really, really nice, very cool, very, very beautiful part of the world. I actually got to spend time on both the North Island and the South Island, if people know what that is, based on how New Zealand is organized. South Island is like the physical beauty is like, it's hard to explain. But they have fjords down there, just like you'd see in like, Norway or the Scandinavian countries. And so I was able to kind of sail in a fjord overnight and then went swimming in it. And it was like magical. So it was awesome. Yeah.
Marc, absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed recording with you today. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Shamir.
The FML podcast is brought to you by Growth Gorilla. To find out how our marketing growth experts can boost your fintech's growth, head to growthgorilla.co.uk. And make sure to search for the FML podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Don't forget to click follow to ensure you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Growth Gorilla, thanks for listening.